Hello, everyone. I'm Kyler Cheatham from Bite Size Live, your host today, and I am honored to be joined with my friend and colleague, Laura Patterson, here, that is our growth and accountability expert. And today, she's going to be taking us through the importance of internal communication and user adoption. And there's a couple reasons that we're talking about that today, specifically because now in today's marketplace, we have so much noise in the technology space. We have so many options, so many vendors. Really choosing the one for you is only about 20% of the battle. 80%, right, comes in actually getting your user group, your employees, wherever you're implementing it in your organization to not only use the technology, but to embrace it so that it can be optimized to really find that return on investment. So before I let Laura, our guest, introduce herself, because she is, an expert in this field, and we're very, very grateful for her insight today, I'm just going to go through a few logistics. If you haven't been to a Bite Size Live episode, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. We go live every week, sometimes on Tuesdays, sometimes on Thursdays, depending on the schedules of our guests. And we are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all of the platforms in which you're seeing us today. If you're joining after the fact, feel free to jump into the comments and we'll go back to answer the questions. That said, the comments we can see live, so I encourage you to join in the conversation, ask questions. The mission of Bite Size is to show there's a lot of different strategies out there, and it's about that transparency and having that conversation on what is best for the unique business. So if you could just give me a quick test and drop in where you're joining from today, and if you think implementation is more important or user adoption is more important. That'll kind of be our icebreaker question. So Laura, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you. If you wouldn't mind giving just a quick intro around what you do, what your company supports, and just a lot of your thought leadership in this space, which is absolutely amazing. So definitely give Laura a follow while she's doing a quick intro.
Kyler, thank you for having me today, and welcome everyone. I am really excited about this topic. I have been at the helm of VisionEdge Marketing, a growth strategy firm that leverages operational excellence, performance management, and customer centricity in order to accelerate growth. And in order to accelerate growth today, we certainly do leverage a lot of technology. All of us do. When I think about our own tech stack, it's just overwhelming sometimes to think about how many different platforms we employ every day. So I'm sure many of you face that as well. If you started counting them, you'd probably have a moment where I'll pause saying, wow, that's a lot. Why do we have so much technology? Our company really helps reduce random acts and replace them with a deliberate, intentional, customer-centric approach so that you have measurable results and smarter growth. So glad to be here.
Absolutely. And the reason I invited Laura is because most of you know I don't really like the word marketing because a lot of times it can correlate to a soft skill, and that is not Laura's approach at all. She believes in analytics, she believes in measurement, and really looking at how do you transform your organization, not just adopt. How do people look forward to using your system, and how do you measure that adoption through those success metrics? So I'm really excited to be able to have her here today. She's also a published author, which is something that, we always love to hear and always love to, have that opportunity to not only showcase your articles, but all of your work on LinkedIn and other platforms as well. So our first kind of discussion topic that we'll go into is looking at adoption analytics. So from your perspective, which I think is kind of outside our IT wormhole that we often follow, what does adoption analytics for technology mean to you?
Okay, so this is really important. And adoption analytics isn't just about technology. Adoption is anything that you might be adopting. It could be a process, it could be tools, it could be systems. And the goal, if you're looking at it from an internal perspective, and I want to speak to the people who are helping their organizations adopt technology, whatever it is that they are bringing into the organization, you want to make sure that it's producing the results that it was intended. And that's the adoption analytics. So in addition to, thinking about adoption and usage rates, what you really want to understand is it producing the outcome that you intended as a result of the purchase, right? The
Mhm.
adoption.
Absolutely. And those are so critical that you define your user adoption strategy within that pre-implementation phase, right? So we're looking at when we are going through any sort of technology implementation, or to Laura's point, any change in general within your organization. Maybe you're doing process optimization. Maybe you're looking at AI strategy. As we always say, my strategy, I even told Laura this the first time we talked, saying my strategy is AI, that's just a sentence, right? That doesn't mean anything, right? That means that you're looking at that tool, but you don't have really an idea of strategically how you're going to approach it. So I know those KPIs and defining those are a big piece to doing that. And Laura, we talked a little bit in our conversation that I want to bring to the audience, kind of about internal adoption versus just another marketing challenge. A lot of people are like, yeah, I'll send the team an email. They know we're doing this. They're fine with it. But you kind of talked about that it's much more complex than that, right?
Yes. Okay. So one of the things we want to be careful to do or not do is have random acts of technology, right? So if we're talking about random acts of just
Mhm.
deploying something, and I love that you brought up AI already,
Mhm.
Kyler, because a lot of people are trying to figure out what to do with AI. AI
Mhm.
is not a strategy; it's a tool, right?
Mhm.
It's a tool that to deploy some kind of strategy. So it's really important to think about that. And I so agree with you. Internal adoption is not a marketing challenge. It is a strategic and organizational challenge.
Mhm.
Yes, you're going to need to communicate, have lots of communication with all the people that are going to be impacted by whatever it is that needs to be adopted. But you're going to also have to just really make sure that there's alignment, engagement, accountability across all the functions that are affected.
Mhm.
So, how are you going to have alignment across the teams? And how is it going to fit in with the culture and your strategic goals? How are you going to what is your actual strategy for adoption? For
Yeah.
which employee groups, if it's internal, right, to your organization. And the reason I bring that up is there are some organizations that are adopting technology to work with their channel, right?
Mhm.
So that would
Mhm.
be outside your organization in order to get your channel partners to
Mhm.
adopt something. So that's just
Absolutely.
an example of why I wanted to distinguish between that. And you have to keep in mind that people are only going to adopt and use something where they can see that there's value in it for them. So you have to
Mhm.
make it really clear what is the value for them. So this is far more than just about marketing. It's really not just about broadcasting a message, but really thinking about your culture and eliminating those random acts of communication, which can happen if you're just thinking about it as a marketing challenge.
Absolutely. And that piece of it, I think we miss a lot of times in IT, right? Because we're engineers, we're data people. We're like, obviously, people are going to want to use this system because it's more efficient, because it's, we don't get degrees in emotional intelligence. So a lot of times we don't really understand kind of the fear base behind these new technologies. Is it going to take my job? Am I still valuable to this company? What is my role here? And the executive team, I know you talk a lot about this in your leadership. How do you, as an executive team, set that tone from the top down to ensure that you're showcasing the what's in it for me, like you talk about?
Yes, and I totally agree about this point that the leadership team needs to model the way. It can't be a leadership team that says, this is for you, but not for me. So everybody has to embrace whatever the change is and show how they are modeling the way as leaders in the company. And the leaders aren't just the people at the very, very top. There are all kinds of leaders within an organization. Some are designated leaders by
Mhm.
title, but then there's other people in the organization who have leadership capabilities and skills, even if they don't have the title. And you want to be able to get those people on board because they can help you have the rest of the organization move forward, right? Take the
Mhm.
risk, make the change, whatever the language is that you're going to use.
Absolutely. And that tone, I know you kind of talk about this too. It sounds like I'm like stalking all of your work, which I am, but and in the tone that you also take, that it's not a destination, right? Getting that alignment is not one thing that you do at a board meeting and say, like, this is our AI budget, this is what we're going to do, this is what we do, this is what we need. But we need that executive engagement throughout the project, throughout the implementation project. That leadership tier, that executive sponsor still needs to be advocating for why are we doing this and why is it important to move the organization forward. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that phrase. And I believe very strongly in having executive sponsors and champions for any initiative. And it doesn't matter, again, if it's a technology initiative. And that person should be someone who is really committed to the entire process, right? Not just the beginning of the process, but understands the value of this shift or this change or this new platform to everyone that will be using it, to the customers that will be eventually on the receiving end of it, because everything we do has some impact on how we engage with, connect with our customers, serve our customers, or should have that. I don't like to use should very often, but in this instance, I feel kind of strongly about that.
Yeah.
So that champion, that executive sponsor, needs to be part of the entire process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've all been on those project calls or their scrums, depending on what you have, where the executive sponsor pops in like once a quarter, and then the whole call is absolutely a huge waste of time because it's just bringing that executive sponsor up to speed because they haven't been reading the project notes. We totally understand that executives have a bigger layer of responsibility than just a core PM, which the core PM still very, very critical to the project and the overall user adoption analytics. But that executive, they oversee a whole layer of the organization that they need to be responsible for. So maybe they're not on every project call, but that's why we do have project notes and we have executive summaries and we have things like that. So we can continue to keep them in the loop. And hopefully, that executive sponsor is someone that is engaged, like you're saying. So
yeah, one of the things one of our customers did related to a project that was pretty significant to their company was they had an executive sponsor, but this executive sponsor had a lot of different responsibilities and couldn't make every meeting. But what this executive sponsor did is they made a video for meetings they could not attend on what this.
that's such a good idea.
So here, so that they didn't look like they weren't engaged. They would say, "Look, sorry, I can't be." I think I saw one of the videos. It went like this: "Sorry, I can't be with you today. I'm in a customer meeting that's, I think it was overseas somewhere, some other country, but this is still very important to me. Here's why it's important to all of us." Had a great little, probably less than 2-minute video, but setting the tone. And here's what's going to be important in today's conversation. So even teeing up what that meeting was going to be about. And I look forward to hearing your feedback when I get, when I return and looking and seeing your progress, something along those lines, Kyler.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's such a good example. And again, we don't we're kind of becoming the modern CIOs, right? The CIO used to be this person that was very siloed to the technical organization of the business, and now a modern CIO is a business leader. Right. They are part of the business, and part of what their responsibility is bringing the enterprise goals into the technology realm and understanding that technology is the backbone of the organization. A lot of times we ask our clients, our community, to name one person in the organization that doesn't use technology. And that is very, very difficult, right? Nowadays, whether we're using our phones, whether we're using a point of sale system, whether we're using an inventory management system to unpack boxes on shelves, right? There's usually every single employee is touching technology at some point. And so now the CIO has kind of gone from this siloed leader that kind of just sits over there and is like, yeah, we can fix that computer. No problem. We can fix that, type of thing. Now we're actually going towards business goals with our technology goals. And that's why that's so critical. And a lot of times we don't think of those things as we come out of this new era of birthing technical leaders, because that's not the industry we grew up in, right? It was very technical. There wasn't a lot of prowess on interpersonal professional relationships. And those are the CIOs, the young CIOs we're seeing get promoted into those positions, the ones that can influence and motivate and mobilize an organization, become a true leader, not the one that has the most degrees from MIT or the most technical certifications. That's kind of the transformation we're going through in leadership right now, as well.
I think that every leader in a company, whatever if they have a C in their name or a V in their name, whatever they are, they need to have really good business acumen, as well as the ability to relate well to others, right? Good interpersonal skills. They need both of those things. Yes, you need the technical skills or whatever it is that's underneath your umbrella, what you are responsible for. But it's real true business acumen. And so a CIO today who can actually talk about how what the technology or process or system is going to solve a business problem, so they can communicate that in terms that the rest of the leadership team understand, and what success will look like for the business and its stakeholders once it is implemented and deployed and used, and then also bring the rest of the organization along. And the CIO needs to be able to partner with lots of different people in the organization. It's not just a marketing person they might partner. You brought up inventory management.
Yeah.
So they might have to be partnering with someone over in delivery, or they might have to be partnering with someone that runs customer success. So they have to be able to create good partnerships, collaborate with a very large set of the leadership team, not just one or two people.
Yeah. So well said. I once moderated this CIO panel. It was one of my, highlights of my career. It was this global CIO panel. And the youngest CIO, I kind of joked with him. I was like, once you get to a certain level, you won't have to wear that tie anymore, because he was the only one in a tie. And he's like, Kyler, I wear this tie as a reminder that I am part of the business. I am not just a coder. I'm not just an engineer. Not that we're just anything in the organization, but that was kind of how he set that intention of, I am that leader. I need to ensure that I have this influence and this partnership. So I love that idea in general. Turning to the audience real quick before we continue the conversation, because Laura and I could just talk all day about this, but thank you for all of these great questions. I'm actually going to share a few of them. So definitely feel free to keep popping them in the chat here, wherever you're viewing from today. So Joe has a great question for you, Laura. How do you use analytics to influence behavior, not just report on it? That is a very deep question.
What a great question. Great question. So if the good analytics, right, should help you identify patterns, right? And one of the things you will be looking at is potentially behavioral patterns. So you could be able to say, I'm looking at the analytics of adoption and usage. Let's talk about adoption rate is different than usage rate. And I'm seeing, and this can be kind of fun competitions. I'm seeing XYZ part of the organization really doing a great job on adoption. Go team, go. But this group over here, or these types of people over here, depending on how they seem to be struggling. Now, what can we do to bring them along? Where are they having a problem? What are the glitches or challenges or gaps that we need to close for them? And how could maybe some of the people who are doing really well in the adoption rate help them, right? Because that's really important. If you can get other parts of the organization who are adopting to talk about the value, right? They become a form of testimonial, they become an ambassador, and even creating ambassadors among your adopters and users is a great way to help move behavior forward.
Absolutely. That's a great way to think about it.
Did I answer his question? I hope I did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the point of this question, is it's about monitoring progress, right? We don't just report on something at the end and be like, we have 80% of users on the system. Well, that's great. But did you use the carrot or the stick approach? Are they looking for areas that they could be more efficient with the system, where they could, earn back some of that return on your spend on the system? Or are they just forced to use it. They used it once, they logged in once, they did all of their training once, and then they're never going to touch it again. Those are two very different scenarios. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
And it's all about value. I want
Exactly.
to emphasize this. It's all about value. Business value. So what is the value to the business? Employee value. How are we creating value for the employees? Customer value. It's all about value, and it's all about time to value. And it's also about the value you're creating in the marketplace so that you can differentiate yourself from the competitors and be more successful, right? All of those things matter. So think in terms of value and success. What does success look like, not just for the business, but for all of the stakeholders that are going to be using this new platform or this new process, right?
Absolutely.
That's an important question. And if you don't know what that looks like, you don't know what that success looks like, because it could look very different for different types of stakeholders. And that's an important thing to remember, so that when you are talking to one group of people, which we might call a persona, versus another group of people, a different persona, you want to know what messages are going to resonate with them.
Absolutely. And that brings me to actually mixed question here that some people are saying, yeah, great question. What metrics do you think are the most underrated when it comes to showing marketing's impact on an organization? So maybe those internal HR metrics. And before I have you answer this one, I think you just said one that is measurable, and that is value. I did an interview with the head of an aerospace HR, massive aerospace and defense company, probably one that you all think of when you hear it first, Lockheed Martin. And they said, the most important analytics that we measure is trust. And that really resonated with me, because so many people think that those are not measurable, and they really are important KPIs. But curious to hear your thoughts on kind of the underrated internal marketing metrics.
Okay, so this is like a conversation in and of itself. So before I give you an answer to this question, I want to be sure we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So measures are just that. They can be quality or quantity, and something simple, right? Like how much you weigh is a measure. It doesn't, there's no indication of whether it's good or bad. There's no judgment. It's just a measure. Some measures we can control. Some measures we can't control. Like, as I said to someone not very long ago, I would do almost anything to be 5'7", but that's not in my control. So spending too much energy on that, probably not the best use of my time or energy. And then there are metrics, which are typically equations, and they provide a standard against which we are going to measure our progress. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And then there are KPIs, which are a very special form of metric, and key performance indicators. The way I like to talk about those is, are you willing to spend money to change the number, right? Are you willing to spend time to change the number? Are you willing to spend and put people on it to change the number? Then it's probably something meaningful to your organization. Now, the way to select your metric for any initiative is to understand what its purpose is for the organization, and make sure that the metric that you choose is tied to the outcome you're expected to produce. It doesn't do any good to pick a metric that you think is a good metric, but then the leadership team or other key stakeholders in the organization will say, but that's not how we're going to measure the success of this initiative, because it needs to be able to do this for the organization. So you want to be clear in your mind, what is the ultimate measure of success? And then how can you then connect what you're doing, if that's marketing, if it's some other group, what you're doing to that measure? That's what's important. So it's not about, although I do have a recommendation on a particular metric I'll share with you in the long term, but I just want people to understand, it's not like there's these very set measures and metrics that apply in all instances, because what you're trying to do and why you're adopting something and why you're using something may be a very different reason than another company for why it's adopting something or using something. So their metric and your metrics would not be the same, right? So if your goal is, for example, to reduce how much effort a customer has to exert in order to do business with you, that is an interesting metric, customer effort, right? How then is what you're doing going to tie to that internally? I hope that made sense.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what this whole conversation is about, is finding those unique metrics for your own adoption. And that's where a lot of times we can see our industry run into trouble with things like industry analysts like Gartner or McKinsey or anything like that. Great resources, right? But you cannot base your whole business strategy off of a framework that was not built for you, right? You need to make sure that you're understanding what are you trying to achieve, and you know that up front, not just, hey, we have to reach our SAP deadline before they sunset the system, so I guess we're just doing this. If you have a sunsetted system, you might as well set some metrics that you make sure that you're actually creating business efficiency and transformation, as opposed to just saying we're upgrading and then make the rest of your culture completely disrupted.
Or if it was using the example customer effort, reducing the customer effort score from X to Y. I also want to just mention one other thing. A lot of people have a tendency to think about what we should measure, like adoption rate or usage rate. I want to also remind everyone that there is a flip side of that that's just as important, and that's adoption leakage or usage leakage. So,
Very
right,
true.
I think that's something sometimes we overlook that, but that's an important indication, right? Because people can get excited about something and quickly adopt. They might use, but then you want to be paying attention to the leakage rate as well.
Absolutely. That's such a good point. Thank you for saying that. That's really important. So, one more audience question. Usually they take over the show, which makes my job really easy. And then we'll kind of go back to what our next of understanding how to treat kind of your users like a customer and understanding what that storytelling around the system actually looks like. So, this is a great question. How do you manage the tension between driving necessary disruption and maintaining organizational stability?
Oh, again, another really good
I
question.
know.
Well, let's face it, when anything new comes in and there's change, it's disruptive. So I think it's really important to be transparent about that and communicate. We know that this is a change and we know it's disruptive. We know that we've done things this way in the past, and we're now asking people to do this way going forward. Let's be clear about why we're doing that and what it means for again, back to value, what it means for our business, what it means for our customers, what it means for our stakeholders. So you can understand that in the end, it will be like this. It's never easy to change your diet, and it's disruptive, right? It changes everything. It changes the aisles you go down in the grocery store. It changes potentially how much you're spending. It changes and if you're one of those people, like we're getting to be label oriented people, it takes more time to read all those labels, and that's a change, right? As an example, I'm just using simple example, but it is a change. But we're looking at it, you have to say, well, this is going to allow us to be more healthy. We're going to reduce the amount of bad stuff that we consume. We're going to reduce, these artificial products or these dyes or whatever it is that we're trying to do. Whatever the reason is that we're doing it, change is hard and it's going to take some time. It's probably going to cost more money too. Those products may actually cost more money. Here's the value that we think it's going to do for our body, for our health, for our aging, whatever it might be. So you have to be very clear to people. It's going to take what the change is going to disrupt, right? I'm just using that as an example because I think everyone can relate to that.
Yes.
And so this comes back to my question, my giving you an answer to a question, like if you have to pick a metric out at the highest level for any initiative, I often suggest look at business outcome velocity. How much faster did you achieve the outcome as a result of the change? So if you're, again, trying to put it in some terms, if you decide I used to, Kyla, you and I talked about this. I used to be a competitive triathlete,
which is
in
amazing.
the sprint world, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I would set out at the beginning of every season what success would look like. And then I would have to think about, well, what is it I'm going to have to do or change is in my running or my biking or my swimming in order to achieve those targets, that success set of targets. And so how much faster can I get to my targets right? So if I need to increase my pace, or I need to increase my miles per hour, business outcome velocity, how much faster did I get to where I was trying to achieve in the season, as an example. Again, trying to give people things that are everyday, that are not tied to a specific technology or platform, because it will be different.
Absolutely. And I mean, I love the storytelling examples, and we'll kind of get in the importance of doing that when we look at our users as a customer. But those are so critical. And I would even add to that, Laura's importance of measuring the leakage, or in this scenario, the risk, right? If you are about to go into a technology implementation and you don't understand small to medium sized businesses, a lot of times SMBs, a failed technology implementation could cause them to close. That's how high the stakes are when it comes to these types of multi-million-dollar investments. So you need to have a plan, right? And understand what that looks like. Poll your organization so that you understand what that risk looks like, and be humble enough as that I'm an executive member. I might not have the clearest vision of what my overall organization is going through right now. So I need to have that data in order to balance the decision. Of course, necessary disruption, getting to the next level of being a competitive business, or being in kind of the AI race in our industry, right? But it's not worth completely disrupting your entire supply chain so you cannot get your customers toilet paper, right? So that we cannot get the end user to be doing what they need to do on the front lines. That is not worth it. And you need to understand the difference between those two and where that risk analysis happens. So when you look at velocity, right, that's so critical. Also, looking at what is my risk assessment here, and how do I ensure I understand that? And it's not from your software vendor. Just remember, they may be great people, they may be amazing salespeople. I guarantee you they are, right? That's their job. Their agenda is to sell you software. Your job is to understand your internal business and the real risk that exists there. But just phenomenal question. Very good question.
And a really good point about risk management. And so one of the best ways to think, to work through that, is through scenario analysis. What if this were to happen when we are going through this process? What if this were to happen? So what if this were to happen? What if a competitor did this? What if the supplier did this? What if this happened with the product that we're buying? What if? Try to go through as many potential what if scenarios that you can, to assess what the risk might be, and also anticipating what they might be might help you mitigate them before they happen, right? So that is a really great exercise to do, and to bring people into that conversation, who are what I will call the skeptics and naysayers in your organization. Everybody knows who those people are.
Absolutely.
When I was in the corporate world, I spent 14 years at Motorola. I always and I use this all the time. When I'm talking to people, I had a woman that was, her name was Beverly. And no matter what I was doing, she always could poke holes in everything I was doing. And I came to really value Beverly because her hole poking helped me shore up what I was attempting to do. So I always tell people, make sure you get a lot of Beverlys in the room, because that's going to help make sure that you have a better success with your implementation, a higher adoption rate, a higher usage rate, faster business outcome velocity, all the things we're talking about. So get lots of Beverlys in the room and go through the what if scenarios.
Absolutely. And that is, we call them gyms in manufacturing, with the spreadsheet, right? Jim runs the manufacturing floor. He's been there for 40 years. He absolutely could probably take apart every machine in that, and he runs it off of this master spreadsheet. And a lot of people are like, oh, but Jim is not going to want that new business intelligence tool, that new, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, what you need to do right now is go ask Jim what his requirements are, engage him in the process early, because a lot of time, especially when we look at kind of the technology natives that have come into the workforce now, there's still so much value in those Gen X employees They have tenure in the organization. They have experience in the organization. They have leadership in the organization. So looking at what you can garner both qualitatively and quantitatively from those human data sets is the most valuable information you will get, because data is going to tell you one thing, right? It's going to tell you whatever data points are in the organization. But the human data sets are actually going to tell you what the culture and the other people will experience, which is why I know, Laura, we're going to get into kind of talking about the importance of talking to each employee group and looking at and measuring those employee groups. How are you feeling about this? What is your take on this implementation? And a lot of times, I can't tell you the amount of times I've sat in executive readout sessions where we've gone through this organizational analysis, and they are shocked at the departments that don't feel like they can trust the leadership team to implement this new technology. So we find that out of the beginning, right? Instead of the end where it's costing us a ton of money or disrupting our customer experience. But in that piece, you say the communication and the marketing to that specific area of the organization needs to be different than to another area. Or to be most successful, that segmentation can be a really, really helpful tactic.
Yes. So when you're looking at employees, people in the organization, you probably want to think about different ways that you can characterize them, different attributes. So you might have an attribute that's around the role they are, right? They're a manager, they're an executive, whatever their role is. And then you might want to also have another thing around maybe their experience, something along that line. And then you may want to have another one around sort of their persona. Maybe your personas are early adopters or enthusiasts. That's a great persona. And then maybe some, another 2 or 3, and the skeptics, right? So think about what those are, because you're going to want to then look and say, okay, what kind of messaging are we going to do and communication are we going to need for people in these roles? And then how will that be different for the people who are in these roles that are the skeptics versus the enthusiasts? Because there's always enthusiasts. So, and then, so think about that, right? And really narrowing in on those personas is very important. Don't just think about titles or roles when you're thinking about your messaging. Really thinking beyond that. And that's, I call those personas. And like I said, a couple of examples might be the enthusiasts, the skeptics. Those are at the extremes. And then there probably are 2 or 3 that you can name in the middle.
Absolutely. And this question is a great kind of follow-up to that. From your experience, what personal skills or mindset shifts are most critical for someone stepping into a change agent role?
Okay, great question. Well, first of all, let's remember that change agents have to be able to get people on board, right? So they have to be good at storytelling. They have to be somewhat persuasive. They have to be good at nurturing. They have to be good at communication. They have to be good at reinforcing behavior. They have to be good at recognizing patterns in the data that says, hey, we got a problem here. They have to be able to know when the organization's stalling out. So there's a lot of different skills there. So there's communication skills, there's analytical skills, there's project management skills. There's a lot of different skills in being a good change agent. And, meeting people where they are and helping them move forward doesn't do any good. I mean, all right, so back to a quick personal story. And then I did not learn how to swim until I was an adult. Learning to swim as an adult is really... As a triathlete. I did not know how to swim until I was very old. And so learning to swim was quite challenging. And I first went to swim lessons with just a regular coach in a regular adult class. But I didn't have any of the fundamentals to be in that class. Yeah. And that coach was not a good coach because he had a group of people, and I really was an outlier for that group of people. I ended up leaving that class and joining a swimming group of 4-year-olds so that I could learn those fundamentals. And the coach was totally different, right? The totally different kind of way of communicating with 4-year-olds than with 40-year-olds.
Absolutely.
And so just think about that as a change agent. I needed to be able to do and change what I was doing with my stroke, my body, my breathing, everything, because I didn't have any of those fundamentals. And so how do you communicate with those people who really are, they're not laggards, they just don't have the skills that you need them to have, versus the people who already have those skills. So a good coach, a good project manager in a way is a coach. So think
Absolutely.
about coaching skills.
Absolutely. 100% a project manager is a successful coach. And I think that the most challenging, at least for me, and I would wonder your feedback for that, is identifying those change agents, because sometimes the disruptors or the skeptics can be great change agents, because if they're like, well, Beverly changed her mind, then I absolutely am on board with this. Sometimes they can be the managers that are that middle management tier that are responsible for setting expectations, and sometimes they can be people that are individual contributors that are just natural leaders, and a lot of times those leadership skills are actually developed when you have no title influence over your peers, right? That's where you're getting that real learning and leadership is, can I influence someone who I don't have any authority over? That's leading, right? And so
Yes.
a lot of times those change agent roles can be hard to identify, especially for us, IT people that, don't have that kind of spidey sense in keeping up with those soft skills. So how do you identify change agents, or in projects, how do you see them and kind of find out who would be best to be an advocate for this project?
I think that's a really good question. And I think you brought up an important word, and that is influencers. So you need to know the people that are going to be involved, and who do people listen to? Who do people listen to? Who do people follow? And because we're not looking at people who necessarily talk a lot. Doesn't necessarily mean the person who does the most talking or other forms of communication. So really, what does influence in your organization look like? Who has demonstrated influence in the organization? Who do people follow? That's a leadership quality, right? And depending on the size of your organization, really, really large organizations, that might be really hard. So you're going to have to ask people, right? Depending on what part of the organization you're going to start in. And I'm a big believer in proof of concept or piloting initiatives. So it's not like you're going to roll something out, in its entirety. You're going to find a place to pilot it, and you want to find a place to pilot it where there's already a person who is an enthusiast or a champion.
Yes.
And they will probably have people in their organization that they will be able to say, these are the people in my organization that I look to as leaders. These are the people other people listen to. These are the people in the organization who have influence, who influence other people's behavior. So find a good, I believe, like I said, I believe in pilots for everything.
Yes.
And if you can, and typically, you want the pilot to be successful. So you want to find a part of the organization that is willing to step up and be the test case, but that they want it to be successful.
Absolutely. And that is so critical, especially now in today's age when everything is AI, autonomous systems, all of these different things. And really, you have no idea how that's going to work in your overall enterprise level technology stack until it's tested in a certain business unit. And a lot of times our methodology is often speed to value. But when you look at how you implement AI, you need to understand not only the cultural pieces of it, which again is 80% the people side, but the other 20% is how do you leverage the efficiency savings that you found in that one pilot to pay for the next pilot, right? So being able to move around that budget so that you're not just blindly investing in these technologies that have not been proven yet, right? So great question. You guys are just
I think there's some
crushing it.
other questions in the chat. I saw a bunch of things rolling in. Are there any others in there that
Absolutely. Yeah, I just don't want to overwhelm you, but if you're ready, we'll go for it.
Yeah, I just want to, yes, I am ready. I could talk a lot on this topic, and I know, y'all, I've been up and had a lot of coffee. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. So, hopefully you'll have a chance to listen to this again. And I hope everyone is getting at least a good idea from this conversation, but I want to hear what your questions are.
Absolutely. And as I promised, I will go back in and personally answer them, and then I tag Laura as well. So she has that opportunity to get in there too. So this is a very interesting question, especially when we're looking at kind of this proof of concept or these user adoption statistics. We always say go live for us is a delusional date until you've been through testing and until you've been through this organizational assessment. You have no idea how it's going to go until you really are testing the system in that proof of concept in that type of business unit. So a lot of times it can be very hard to convince the project teams to slow down so that they can speed up on gaining value of the system. So have you, in any sort of situation where you're doing an operational excellence project or anything like that, ever had to convince a client to slow down in order to speed up?
Yes. And if you're not familiar with the stage gate process, I want you to go look that up. It's often applied to bringing new products to market, but we can apply it to bringing new systems, platforms, and technologies to the business. And stage gate process has what is obvious gates, and the gates are yes or no. And in that, you have agreement at the outset. When we get to this gate, we'll make a decision about whether we're ready to move to the next stage or not. And here will be the criteria for making that decision. So you're establishing the criteria at the start so that when you get to that end of that phase and you're transitioning to the next phase, you hit the gate and you ask yourself, have we met all that criteria according to what we agreed to? And if the answer is no, then you need to stop, right? So it's an excellent process. It's easy to apply. There's lots of research out there about it. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just deploy something like that. That's very different than the sprint process. I am a big fan of sprints, but sprints are really about the project management. The stage gate is really about what the question was. How do you know when it's time to move forward or to take a pause? So that's why I'm answering that question.
Absolutely. I think a lot of that has to do with mindset set by the leadership, right? The gates are a tool, not a punishment, right? It's a tool to know if we're on track. It's not at all something, and that begins with leadership, where we need to be scared to surface that, where we need to be nervous to say to our executive sponsor, like, hey, we're having issues with X, Y, and Z. It's on them to set that tone for, hey, these are milestones that we achieve as a collective, not just you as a PM that needs to drag everyone along with you.
Yeah. And the stage gate isn't necessarily a milestone. It could be feedback from, like, for example, in new product, it could be feedback from the market. Well, this could be feedback from employees that say, hey, we said that 80% of the people that are going to be part of this proof of concept would be at this point in the usage or adoption or whatever words we're going to use, 80% before we would move forward. Well, we're only at 60%. We need to slow down to let the other 20% get there, as an example. So it's really not just milestones. When I think of milestones, I think of completion steps, right? And that's not what I'm talking about in stage gate. So that's a much bigger topic. I'm happy to talk about that with anyone that is interested in thinking about that. But you can find that if you Google stage gate or use your handy dandy ChatGPT or Perplexity, it'll give you all kinds of information about it.
Excellent. Well, let's see if we can knock out these last two questions in our time here. But our next one is, if you could give one piece of advice to a rising marketing leader about becoming an agent of change, what would it be?
Ask a lot of questions. Be a good listener, right? So when one of the things I find when I work with a lot of marketing people, they are given an ask or a task and they just run off and do it. And that's a random act, right? And what we really want to know is, what is the business outcome that this is tied to? How are we going to measure the success of it? What is it you're hoping it will achieve? How will it make an impact on our customers? Right? All those, ask questions and listen. What is the problem we're trying to solve? Or whatever, there's probably I gather you're smart. So you'll probably ask really smart, maybe smarter questions than I'm suggesting, but be a good listener, ask questions. That's important.
Absolutely. Definitely a great piece of advice here. And then Brittany has a question, another great question down here. How can someone contribute when they're not in the room for budget and stakeholder discussions? Excellent question.
Okay, so it is an excellent question, but I want to tell you, we all are contributing and we're not all going to be in the room all of the time. So it's important, again, to ask, how can I contribute? Right? So, when someone asks, as there's an initiative that you're interested in or something is going on, step up and take the initiative and say, how can I contribute? What is the best way for me to help move this initiative forward? If I could do one or two things to make a difference and a positive impact on this initiative, what would you want me to do? There's all different, again, ways to frame that question. But I find that people are reluctant sometimes to ask questions because they're afraid that it's going to make them look stupid or uninformed or whatever it is that they're afraid of. But it's the questions that show that you're insightful, that you're interested, that you want to help. So if you have that idea that asking a question is a negative, I want you to change your mindset and understand that asking insightful questions is a good sign, not a bad sign.
Yeah, especially in technology, where we think we should all be software engineers. And that's just simply not the case. The more important part that is rising now is the rise of that business technologist, right? That person that can speak to the business and to the technology. And that's so critical, especially for PMs. And a lot of times, PM's role is really hard because you're not always going to be in the room, but you're responsible for executing what was decided in the room. So being as informed as you possibly can, especially to budget and understanding like how much does the system cost? How much will we save? You can't argue with data when you're putting together a big proposal and then go find your Beverly, right, to poke some holes through it so that you're able to be armed and ready for this conversation with the executive team of why we need this new system. This is what I found. I've done my due diligence. I've asked the right questions internally and externally, and I'm ready to be part of the leadership team.
And Nick has a question here I saw that I do want to answer.
Which
about
one?
What personal skills or mindset.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. Yes. Thank you.
I like that question. So I am going to be bold and step into it. I think there are three things, maybe four. One is a given. That's good interpersonal relationships, right? Being able to establish rapport with others, listen to others, so forth and so on. All those interpersonal skills. So I'm going to put that as table stakes. But now I'm going to give you three others. I already mentioned one. That is business acumen. You need to remember that we are working for a business and we need to understand and operate like business people first before our function. If you're in marketing or technology or sales, it doesn't matter. Business people first. If you don't know what business acumen is, go spend some time learning and brush up on your business acumen skills. Because if you're going to talk about money, you need to be clear about what that means. If you're going to talk about revenue generation, you need to be clear about what that means. If you're talking about customer retention, what does that mean financially to the organization? Any of those kinds of things. Next, a good problem solver. You need to have ideas on how to solve problems. This is a big peeve with me, and anyone who wants to have this conversation offline with me, I'm happy to have it. But I find that a lot of people are challenged to solve problems. Don't sit there, and please don't think that you're going to get every answer to every problem by asking ChatGPT. That's not a good problem solver, right? That's a good ChatGPT prompt expert, but not a problem solver. And the last thing is be a good critical thinker. So these are soft skills that all of us can always develop. And critical thinking, I mean, don't take everything at face value. Ask questions. I'm not saying being a skeptic. I'm not saying those things. Obviously, don't do that. But being a critical thinker is a really important skill. So those are my recommendations, Mick. I hope those are helpful to you.
Well, I think that is a perfect way to round out this episode. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining the conversation. Thank you to the audience for all these amazing questions. Laura, if the audience wants to connect with you or follow some of your thought leadership, how can they find you?
You can find me at Laura P at VisionEdge Marketing on the website, VisionEdge Marketing. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just look up Laura Patterson on LinkedIn. I think I'll pop up.
Perfect. Yeah. And her, all of her information is also in the notes wherever you're getting your episode today, whether it be audio live or a video after the fact. But thank you so much, Laura. We'll have to have you back for another conversation because I feel like we could go double time here. But this has been so amazing. We so appreciate you kind of bringing us in and teaching us about the importance of understanding the people side of your technology.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for your great questions. I love it.
I know. Aren't they
Yes.
awesome? They're just the best, the best, the best. So, well, thank you all. I will see you next week. And remember, we have our confidential lives on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern time here in the US. So be sure to join that. We're talking more about software selection and AI this week. So we're excited to see you there. But thank you to everyone. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Laura. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.